Maria had never been to a city this big before, and when the bus stopped in front of tall glass buildings that reflected the afternoon sun, she felt both nervous and excited, clutching the small bag that carried all she owned. For today she was starting her job as a live-in maid for a man she had never met, a wealthy CEO named Richard Lee, whose name carried weight in every corner of the city. The driver had given her directions to the tall gray mansion that stood behind iron gates, and as she stepped inside, she was struck by the silence, the polished marble floors, and the faint scent of fresh flowers that seemed to linger in the air. Yet the place did not feel warm or welcoming. It felt distant, as if the walls themselves were holding on to secrets. And when Richard appeared in a crisp suit with cold eyes that quickly softened when he introduced her to his 8-year-old daughter Emily, Maria could sense that beneath his stern manner, there was a heavy sadness, for Emily was quiet, polite, and kept her eyes on the floor, as if speaking too much might break something inside her. Maria tried to smile and greet her warmly, but the girl only nodded and led her to a small guest room at the end of a long hallway where sunlight streamed through the window, making the space feel gentler. And over the next few days, Maria noticed that Emily barely spoke to anyone, spending her time alone in her room, reading or staring out the window, while Richard left early and returned late, his presence more like a shadow passing through the house than a father's embrace. One afternoon, while Maria was dusting Emily's shelves, she noticed a small doll in a silk dress, and for some reason, it reminded her of an old melody she had once heard as a child in a faraway place, a soft Mandarin lullaby that had floated through the thin walls of a tiny home she lived in for a short time years ago. And without thinking, she began humming the tune, the sound slow and careful, as if pulling something from the deepest corner of her memory. But before she could finish, she heard a small, clear voice behind her say something in Mandarin, words she did not understand, and when she turned, Emily was looking straight at her, eyes wide and curious, as if Maria had just unlocked a door she never knew existed. Maria laughed softly and asked what she said, but Emily only smiled a little, the first real smile Maria had seen from her, and repeated the words, this time more slowly, as if testing whether Maria could follow. But before Maria could answer, she noticed a figure in the doorway, Richard, standing completely still, his hand resting on the doorframe, his eyes fixed on his daughter as though he was staring at a ghost. And in that frozen moment, Maria felt the air grow heavy with something unspoken, something neither of them could yet explain, and she wondered why the song had made him look so pale, as if he had just heard a voice he thought was gone forever. Richard stood at the doorway longer than Maria expected, his eyes locked on Emily as if searching for an answer only he could understand. And when he finally stepped inside, his voice was calm but carried a strange tension as he asked Maria where she had learned that song, the one she had just been humming. Maria blinked in surprise, unsure why such a simple tune seemed to matter so much. And she told him it was something she remembered from her childhood, though she could not recall exactly where or when, only that she had lived for a short time in a small fishing village far from here, a place where the neighbors spoke a language she never fully learned. And sometimes she heard an older woman singing the same melody in the evenings, a sound that stayed with her for years. Richard's expression grew unreadable, and without another word, he excused himself and left the room, leaving Maria and Emily in a strange, lingering silence. Yet something had shifted because Emily's eyes now followed Maria with quiet curiosity, and later that day, the girl began to speak to her more often, mixing English with soft Mandarin phrases, testing whether Maria would respond. Though Maria could only smile and shake her head, admitting she did not understand, but enjoying the sound of Emily's voice anyway. As the days passed, Emily grew warmer toward Maria, even laughing at her gentle jokes. And Maria felt a sense of comfort in the child's company that she had not expected when she first arrived. But she also noticed Richard watching them from a distance, his gaze heavy and thoughtful, as if he was trying to piece together a puzzle that only he knew existed. One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Maria walked past Richard's study and saw him sitting at his desk, holding an old photograph in his hand, the kind that had faded edges and worn corners. And she caught a glimpse of it before he quickly turned it over, a picture of a smiling woman holding a baby in her arms. And in the background, a young girl who looked strangely familiar, almost like Maria herself when she was little. The sight made her pause, a faint unease settling in her chest, but she said nothing and continued to her room, unable to shake the image from her mind. Meanwhile, Richard sat alone with the photo, remembering the months when his wife had disappeared overseas before Emily's birth, returning with stories she never explained and a sadness she never spoke of. And now, seeing Maria here in his home, humming that exact lullaby, and unknowingly connecting with Emily. He could not ignore the possibility that their lives had crossed paths long before this moment. The thought unsettled him, not because it frightened him, but because it felt like fate had opened a door he was not ready to walk through. And yet, deep down, he knew the truth had a way of surfacing no matter how long it stayed hidden. The next morning, Maria found herself sitting at the kitchen table with Emily, helping her peel oranges, when the little girl suddenly asked if Maria had ever been to another country. And without much thought, Maria nodded and began telling her about a year from her childhood when her mother took a temporary job in a small fishing village overseas. A quiet place where the sea was always in view, and the air smelled of salt, where she would play in narrow streets lined with lanterns and listen to the neighbors speak a language she barely understood. She recalled a particular family who lived 2 doors down, a kind woman with gentle eyes, who often carried a baby in a blue blanket. And sometimes that woman would let Maria hold the baby while humming a soft Mandarin lullaby, the same song she had hummed to Emily the other day. And as she spoke, Emily listened closely, her head tilted, her eyes fixed on Maria, as though the story meant more to her than Maria realized. In the hallway, Richard had stopped on his way to the office, his heart pounding as her words drifted toward him, because everything she described matched perfectly with the place his wife had gone years ago, and the timelines overlapped so exactly. It made his chest tighten. Maria went on, explaining that she had been only 8 years old at the time, and she never knew why her mother's work took them there, or why they left so suddenly. Only that one day they packed in a hurry and boarded a boat without saying goodbye, and that memory had stayed with her as a strange, unfinished chapter in her life. Richard's hand trembled on the banister as he realized the implications. His wife had been in that same village during those months. She had a baby, and now Maria, a woman who could easily have been part of that past, was here in his home, connecting with his daughter in ways he could not. Later, when Emily had gone upstairs, Maria walked past Richard in the hallway, unaware that he had been listening, but she noticed something different in his face, a mix of curiosity and caution, as though he was carrying a secret he didn't know how to share. That night, Maria sat in her room and thought about the baby in the blue blanket, wondering where she was now, if she had grown into a young girl somewhere far away, not knowing that the answer was sleeping just down the hall. And as rain began to tap gently against the windows, the walls of the mansion seemed to hold that old melody in their silence, like an unspoken link between past and present, that neither she nor Richard could yet put into words, but both could feel growing stronger with every passing day. That night, Richard could no longer ignore the storm of questions in his mind, and when the house had grown quiet and Emily had fallen asleep, he knocked gently on Maria's door, his voice calm but weighted as he asked if they could talk. And when she invited him in, he hesitated for a moment before asking about her mother, about the years she mentioned in the fishing village, pressing for details that, until now, she had never thought were important. Maria frowned slightly, unsure why he seemed so invested. But she told him what little she remembered, that her mother's name was Grace, that she worked for a wealthy family during that time, that they lived in a small home near the shore, and that she had spent many afternoons with a woman who sang the Mandarin lullaby, while holding a baby who seemed to adore her. As she spoke, she opened the small wooden box she kept on the shelf, the one she had carried with her through every move, and inside were old photographs, a folded letter she could no longer read because it was in a language she didn't understand, and a delicate silver necklace with a tiny carved pendant. When she handed the necklace to Richard, his breath caught in his throat, his fingers tightening around it as if afraid it would vanish, because he knew without a doubt it had belonged to his late wife, May, a gift he had given her before she ever left for that mysterious trip overseas. His voice wavered as he asked where Maria had gotten it, and when she told him it had been given to her by the baby's mother as a farewell gift before she and her own mother left the village, the truth began to crystallize in his mind, a truth that made his knees weak. His wife had been the woman Maria remembered, and the baby she spoke of was none other than Emily. The connection was undeniable, the timelines perfectly aligned, and now he saw the reason Emily had instinctively trusted Maria from the start, because somewhere deep in her earliest memories, she knew her. Maria sat frozen as Richard explained, his words slow and heavy, telling her how his wife had gone away during her pregnancy, how she had written vague letters but never explained what happened in those months, and how she had died years later, without ever mentioning Maria, yet had clearly kept a promise to watch over her in spirit, because fate had brought her here. Silence hung between them, both overwhelmed by what they had uncovered, and in that quiet, Maria realized that the song she had carried in her heart for so many years had been more than just a melody, had been a thread, weaving her life and theirs together in ways no one could have planned. And as she looked into Richard's eyes, she saw not just the stern CEO who had hired her, but a man whose guarded world had just been shaken open by the truth. The next morning, the house felt different, as if the air itself carried a quiet understanding. And when Maria stepped into the kitchen, she found Richard already there, not in his usual suit but in a simple sweater, his expression softer than she had ever seen, and as he poured her a cup of tea, he told her he had not slept much, his mind still replaying every detail of their late-night conversation. Because the truth had rewritten the way he saw her, and even the way he saw his own life. Maria, still trying to process everything, sipped her tea in silence until Emily entered, rubbing her eyes. And without hesitation she walked over to Maria, wrapping her arms around her in a hug that lasted a little longer than usual, as if she somehow knew that Maria was no longer just the maid, but someone who had been part of her story from the very beginning. Over the following days, the atmosphere in the mansion shifted. Meals that were once quiet became filled with conversation. Richard no longer rushed out early in the mornings, and Maria found herself sitting with them at the dining table instead of eating alone in the kitchen, the walls that had once felt cold, now warmed by laughter and the gentle hum of everyday life. One evening, Emily brought out an old music box from her room, winding it up so that it played the same Mandarin lullaby, and the three of them sat together on the couch listening to it, the soft notes filling the room like a bridge between past and present, between loss and newfound family. Richard, with a rare smile, told Maria that he no longer saw her as an employee, but as someone meant to be here, someone who had unknowingly kept a promise his wife could never fulfill herself. And he asked her to stay for as long as she wished, not out of obligation, but because they needed her as much as she might need them. Maria felt a lump in her throat as she agreed, realizing that this home, which had once been just another job, was now the place where she truly belonged. In the weeks that followed, they began making new memories together, Richard teaching Emily how to ride a bike, while Maria cheered from the sidewalk. Rainy afternoons spent baking cookies, and quiet nights where the three of them read together. In the living room, the sound of pages turning, blending with the faint melody of the music box in the background. And though none of them said it aloud, they all understood that their lives had been changed not by chance, but by an unbroken thread of love that had stretched across years and oceans to bring them back together. And as Emily sang the lullaby, one evening, her small voice steady and warm, Maria and Richard exchanged a look that said more than words ever could, that no matter how their story had started, it had been rewritten into something far more beautiful than they could have imagined.